Imagine working full-time every week, showing up on time, doing everything right, and still wondering whether the money in your account can cover rent, food, power, transport, and a tiny bit of breathing room. That's the question we're testing today. In New Zealand, in 2025, can you actually live on the minimum wage, and how does it compare to the living wage? First, a quick reality check so we're on the same page. As of 1st April 2025, New Zealand's adult minimum wage is $23.50 per hour. The starting out and training minimum wage is $18.80 of the adult rate. Those are legal floors that employers must meet. They're before tax and before things like KiwiSaver or student loan deductions. Now, the living wage is different. It's not a law. It's a voluntary benchmark calculated by the living wage movement as the hourly rate needed for workers and their whānau to meet basic needs with dignity and participate in society. For the 2024-25 year, the rate is $27.80 through 31 August 2025, and from 1st September 2025, the 2025-26 living wage is $28.95. That jump matters when we run the numbers. There's also a useful marker in the wider economy. Immigration settings use a median wage benchmark for many work visas. From 18th of August 2025, the accredited employer work visa threshold steps up to $33.56 per hour. You don't need a visa to work here to care about that number. It simply shows what policymakers consider a typical skilled wage line in the sand, and it's quite a bit higher than both the minimum wage and the living wage. Let's translate the minimum wage into a paycheck you can feel. 40 hours at $23.50 gives you $940 gross per week. Take away PI tax and ACC levies, leaving out KiwiSaver and student loan for now, and a common calculator estimate lands you roughly around $780 take-home per week. If you add KiwiSaver or have a student loan, your take-home drops further. If you work extra hours or have a second job with a different tax code, it shifts again. But for a clean snapshot, $780 is a useful ballpark. Next, zoom out. Prices in 2025 aren't falling into your lap. Officially, annual inflation ran at 2.7% in the year to June 2025. That headline number is inside the Reserve Bank's target band, but it doesn't mean essentials feel cheaper. Food, insurance, electricity, and council rates have been rising faster than the overall average, so everyday budgets still feel squeezed. If you've noticed the grocery bill creeping up or power nudging higher at the worst possible moment, you're not imagining it. So, can you live on $780 take-home a week? Let's test 3 common situations and see where the pressure shows up most. Scenario 1. You're single and flatting in a big city. You want a decent room in a shared place, a warm, dry home if you can get it, reliable internet, and either a public transport pass or enough fuel to commute. On a minimum wage paycheck, rent becomes the gravity well. In a high-demand city, a room in a good location can swallow more than half of your weekly take-home once you add power and internet. Groceries for one are manageable if you meal plan, buy seasonal fruit and veg, and watch specials, but you'll feel every extra $10. Transport is the next lever. If you can run on buses or trains, your costs are predictable. If you drive, fuel plus boaf, rego, insurance, and occasional maintenance nibbles the edges of your budget. After phone, toiletries, and a small buffer for clothes or an unexpected cost, there's often not much left. Surplus? Possible, yes, if you share, if your rent is fair for the area, and if you're disciplined. But it's tight, and one surprise bill can wipe out a week's breathing room. Scenario 2. 2 incomes under one roof, 2 flatmates or a couple. This is where the maths noticeably shifts. Shared rent and utilities drop your per-person housing cost. Internet is the same whether it's one of you or 2, and you can batch cook, buy larger packs, and split transport. 2 people both on minimum wage aren't suddenly flush, but the margin for error is bigger. You can keep a modest emergency buffer. You can say yes to an occasional low-cost social thing, and you're less likely to lose sleep over a random dentist bill. If one or both of you is on the living wage instead of the minimum, you'll feel the difference immediately. That extra $4 or $5 per hour, per person, turns a bare-bones budget into something that can handle real-life bumps. Scenario 3. A single parent with 1 child. This is the toughest test for any wage floor. Childcare or after-school care, higher food costs, kids' clothes, and school activities. All of that stacks on top of rent, power, and transport. The good news is New Zealand does have supports like the Accommodation Supplement and Working for Families, but eligibility and amounts vary by income, rent, and family situation. If this is you, it's worth checking official calculators to see what you may qualify for. On the pure wage side, the gap between minimum wage and the living wage becomes more than a political talking point. It's the difference between constant trade-offs and some room to breathe. Let's put the minimum and the living wage side by side. $23.50 versus $27.80, shifting to $28.95 from September. At 40 hours, that's a weekly gross of $940 on the minimum wage, and around $1,118 at $27.80, or $1,158 at $28.95. After tax, the gap shrinks a little, but it's still hundreds of dollars a month. On groceries and power alone, that can be the difference between hanging on and getting ahead by a few percent, enough to build a tiny buffer so one car repair doesn't become a crisis. Now, why do we even have a minimum wage and a living wage? The minimum wage is a legal baseline to prevent the worst forms of underpayment. It's set by government and reviewed regularly. The living wage is a civil society calculation. Employers choose to adopt it because they believe it's fair and because it can help with recruitment and retention, especially in sectors where turnover is expensive and experience matters. If you're an employee, the living wage is something to look for when you apply to certain councils, universities, NGOs, and certified employers. If you run a business, it's worth doing the maths. Sometimes paying a bit more saves you money in training, onboarding, and lost productivity. There are a few levers you can pull, no matter which wage you're on. The first is housing. If you can tolerate a slightly longer commute or live just outside the flashiest neighborhoods, you can shave a meaningful amount off weekly rent. Flatting with one extra person can drop your share of housing and power by more than any other single decision. The second is energy. Shop around for power plans. Take the time to compare rates and low user options if they apply, and track your actual usage. The third is transport. If public transport works for your commute, a monthly pass can be cheaper and more predictable than fueling a car. If a car is essential, driving gently, keeping tires inflated, and combining errands genuinely trims fuel spend. None of these moves are glamorous, but together they tilt the numbers your way. Food is where planning pays. If you're on the minimum wage, think base plus boost. Base means a repeatable set of low-cost staples: rice, oats, pasta, frozen veg, beans, eggs, tinned fish. So you're never starting from zero. Boost means chasing specials for meat and fresh produce, swapping in seasonal fruit and veg, and cooking once for twice. If you're on the living wage, you'll still benefit from the same habits. You'll just have more flexibility to say yes to variety without blowing the budget. Let's return to the big question: can you actually live on the minimum wage in 2025? The honest answer is that it's possible with careful budgeting, especially if you share housing costs, but it's fragile. It often means saying no to things you'd like to say yes to, and it means you're exposed to surprises: an unexpected move, a power bill after a cold snap, a dental bill, a bigger than expected what-if. The living wage doesn't solve everything, but it clearly reduces the number of either-or decisions you have to make every week. It turns hanging on into managing. And with two adults in the same household, it begins to look like a sustainable plan rather than a month-to-month balancing act. Here's one more way to frame it. The visa median wage at $33.56 isn't a target for everyone, and not every job will or should pay that. But keep it in your head as a marker for where a lot of skilled roles sit. If your long-term plan is to get ahead, look for steps that move you from the minimum to the living wage, and then from the living wage toward that median wage horizon. Certifications, apprenticeships, on-the-job learning, or switching into roles with clearer progression ladders. The jump from $23.50 to $28.95 is a meaningful pay rise. The jump from there to the low 30s is a shift in lifestyle. It won't happen overnight, but it's a game plan that compounds. Before we wrap, two quick cautions about the numbers we used. First, take-home pay varies with KiwiSaver, student loans, tax codes, and extra hours. Use a reputable New Zealand take-home calculator to plug in your exact situation, rather than relying on rough examples. Second, inflation moves, but what matters to you is not the headline figure. It's your basket. If your rent just went up, or your council rates jumped, or your power plan is out of contract, you might feel more pressure than a 2.7 headline suggests. On the other hand, if you've just moved into a warmer, cheaper flat, you may suddenly feel like you got a raise without changing jobs. Check your own reality and update it every few months. So where does all of this land? If you're on the minimum wage, yes, you can live on it, especially if you share costs, plan meals, and keep transport predictable. But it's tight in larger cities, and resilience is low. If you're on the living wage, the week-to-week anxiety eases. You can still feel the pinch in expensive areas, but you've got room to handle the bumps that real life throws at you. And if your goal is to move beyond manageable, start mapping your next skill step now. Even a small qualification that unlocks $1 more per hour pays for itself shockingly fast when you're counting every dollar. If this breakdown helped, tell me where you live in New Zealand and which costs are biting hardest for you right now. Rent, food, power, transport, or something else. Your experience helps others who are trying to make sense of their own budgets. And if you want practical follow-ups, like power plan comparisons, grocery basket strategies, or real numbers by city for 2025, hit like, subscribe, and share this with a friend who's doing the weekly math. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.